We have 638 folks signed up for cohort this semester. Today's agenda, we have Andy Johnson of the ADL, who's going to speak on the future of xAPI and update from the ADL. And then we're going to go through some cohort business, talk through team updates, and talk through the midpoint reflection, which was shared out last week. Behind the mics today on cohort are myself, Jessica Jackson, Aaron, Megan, our very own guild master right here saying hello to everyone. Jamie and Leanne are also helping on production from behind the scenes. Today, we are in our, yes, Judy, we are in our team check-ins. We're going to talk about an update from the ADL. This is following last week where we had a report from DevLearn where we had so many amazing people doing work with xAPI, update on things that they're learning in the field. So if you missed last week's session, be sure to check that out. We now have all of our videos hosted on YouTube. So it should be more accessible for those using phones. And the link, again, is sent out every Friday after a web session. So you should have all of those links. Next week, we'll have Shelley Blake, Plock, and Jody talking about the state of the specification. So that's going to be another interesting topic. And then we'll move into project team demos and prepare for the party.
Project team demos are like favorite, awesome. It's good to see all the work that you guys have done. And then, well, you'll talk about party.
Yeah, the demos, I'm really excited to see some of your demonstrations. With that, I'm going to turn the screen and mic over to Andy Johnson, who is with the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative. He's going to share on the future of xAPI and update from the ADL.
All right, thanks, Jessica. Hi, this is Andy Johnson. I am a ADL CETA contractor, which basically means that I am not government, but we interface with government to help them get work done. I've been with the ADL Initiative, what most people just call ADL, for almost 20 years now. I started getting involved with SCORM 0.9, if you can believe that. Since then, I was the lead on xAPI. And as Megan said in the chat, I met her at a boot camp, and they were presenting their first xAPI cohort project, which ADL actually started with. Craig Wiggins and I had started that, and then thankfully, when we were told to, hey, knock it off, you know, industry should do that, Megan stepped in and grabbed that and has, you know, taken it to brand new heights. So super happy to be here, and I'm glad to present and not have to have an xAPI 101 slide for a deck. It's a really awesome experience that you guys are all somewhat seasoned. Hopefully you've been through many semesters of the cohort now, but happy to be here and to present. So with that, let me get going into a little bit of how DOD is doing. So I'm not going to air all of the Department of Defense's dirty laundry, but we struggle in a lot of ways. The deprecation of Adobe Flash is going to hit us hard, even though we've had some preemptive efforts. And despite the fact that we have SCORM for a standard for many of our LMSs, the same systems are bought multiple times, and when we could have some consolidation. DOD is trying to resolve a lot of these problems. One of the problems, though, is inherent that our acquisition cycles are so long, and our software cycles, as you guys know, are getting even shorter. We have Windows updates now are very frequent. We don't have this notion of buying software in the box very much anymore. So in DOD, we have our requirements outdated usually by the time the product arrives. So what I want to tell you about today is some of the ways that ADL is trying to attack some of these problems, put out some of these fires through use of xAPI and other technologies. So in case you don't know, and most people actually probably don't, they kind of think of ADL as this government program. So we're actually called the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative. If you go international, ADL is just referred to as Advanced Distributed Learning, so it gets really confusing because a lot of people just call all their learning ADL. So then the acronym gets thrown around like crazy to the point where we can't separate, you know, what a place is from a person or anything. It's like, you know, Smurfs. So like everything's so Smurfy. It all gets to be ADL. So we've tried to make an effort to make ourselves known more as the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative. And where we are situated is in the Department of Defense under the Office of the Secretary of Defense, under the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness, And then if you follow that all the way down, the DASD, the Deputy Assistant Under Secretary of Defense for Force Education and Training. So that's now where we are situated in force education and training to really try to, and we've kind of resituated ourselves as being a champion for the force, the United States, all forces together, unified force in education and training. So that's what ADL is and where we are situated within the government. Now, I wanted to talk first about some of our funded research efforts, because this really, to me, is indicative of where things are going, where ADL leadership wants to take ADL and really take the rest of the Department of Defense in terms of education and training. So with all these, I can put up a link for if anybody is interested. I'll throw it in the chat, so let's give me 1 sec. And please don't go to that link now, but if you do want more information, I'm going to put that in the chat now just so I make sure it's there and I don't forget about it. Anyways, so the first area, we're funding 4 main research efforts in this year, and we have other efforts that have persisted across multiple years. But this first one is the notion of a universal learner record. Now, when we think about universal learner records, we think about learner profiles, right? We've seen this in pretty much any learning management system. You have the ability to customize your preferences, your avatars, any type of information that's personal and really persists across a variety of learning activities is part of your learner profile. And we could argue that your entire learner history might be included in that profile. What ADL is trying to do is come up with a universal learner record for all of DOD. And the way we think of that in terms of xAPI is that xAPI is usually the evidence of different types of assertions or adjustments to profiles. When we talk about assertions, that's usually done in the context of competencies, where we have there might be some sort of test that you take, and therefore it means that you are competent in algebra or biology or in sales, or even things that are more nebulous like leadership that can be more universal qualities. All those things can be thought of as competencies, and xAPI the evidence for that competency, because really when we're trying to provide evidence for competence, there needs to be some sort of learner record, and xAPI is perfect for that with the statements that it can put out. If we then aggregate a lot of those statements and a lot of those assertions, we end up with more of a ground truth of a learner profile, things that I've actually done, things that can be shared across systems. So that's what we're trying to do with our first topic, these universal learner records. Second topic, and now we're starting to get a little more excited. I put these in the topical order on the page, not the order I think of them as important. Another one that is more important to me, though, is accrediting an xAPI Learning Record Store. Now, this isn't as important for you guys, but it's very important in DOD, and it's important for those of you who do have products that use xAPI, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to help xAPI products get a foothold in DOD by reducing barriers to this acquisition process that I described before. It's a year long, and because it takes so long, it disinterests some of our commercial vendors. So what we're trying to do is get some of that paperwork standardized, get some of those things out of the way, so that when DOD engages with you guys, they don't have to jump through as many hoops, and they can just start guiding those types of products right in to their ecosystems, such that they can implement LRSs, they can buy commercial products. Just how DOD doesn't really worry about buying flight simulators anymore, because a flight simulator is kind of a thing. We want xAPI to be kind of a thing that they don't think about when if they want to buy a learning record store. We want it to be something that's just kind of faded into the background as part of this acquisition process, because the paperwork's already done. And if we can get that type of research nailed down, then that'll open the door for everybody else. The third one, and my favorite, is the CMI-5. So, and I'm going to have another slide on what describes exactly what ADL or what CMI-5 is in a little bit. But what we're seeing in xAPI adoption in DoD is that xAPI lacks session management verbs, and it doesn't do sequencing. And while it can track everything, it's so flexible it makes it hard to know what to track. And in DoD, and I imagine a lot of other places, you just want to start with something that's familiar. And that's what CMI 5 really does. It enables you to do those things that you normally do in a learning management system in tracking SCORM type of interactions. I'm going to use that word a lot, and I'm not going to define it, so hopefully you know what it is. But basically, it's those types of completions, successes, and scores that you get in a traditional learning management system. Now, what CMI 5, this particular research effort does is it establishes both a CMI 5 player and a test suite. So if you are familiar with ADL and our background in SCORM, we put out 2 similar products for SCORM for every single release of that in a sample runtime environment and a test suite. And these 2 things are really important because it enables people who are just trying to author content the ability to play it without having to interface with a particular vendor. You can just download something or use our web service. It stands alone, and you can try it, and you can make sure that in the handshake that exists between learning content and system, that you're holding up your end of the bargain. Similarly, the test suite is something that you can plug either content or system into, and it will tell you exactly what you've implemented correctly and what you've not implemented correctly, to the point of hopefully empowering customers to feel confident in the tools that they're purchasing. And that's really one of the main things that ADL tries to do. In addition to increasing adoption within DOD, we want to stabilize the marketplace and really make it so that the best products do have a chance to make it to the top, not just kind of who's kind of what's the word I'm looking for, ingrained into a certain culture of kind of the good old boys type of system. What we're looking for is to really enable innovation, and the way we do that is by offering these standards that can exist to allow that baseline confidence that all consumers can have. And then the last area in which we are doing new research is on personal identifiable information, PII, and privacy. And as you can imagine, in Department of Defense, we're very concerned with the privacy of individuals that are operating within distributed learning. And one thing the CMI 5 group has realized, there's a lot of expertise in the compliance realm in there, is that really when you start talking about xAPI, the actor is the only type of information, the only type of actor that can be secure is the account, because that is really grounded in a particular domain, and it doesn't have the types of identifiers that are often found in email addresses, and then of course, if I give you my name, that's pretty personally identifiable. We do have to be careful because even a username can be personally identifiable, so we've actually had people recommend to use a hash of that username. But there's a lot that goes into this research effort. In addition to that, it's looking at different existing DoD policies and really expanding what we know about privacy. So this slide that I want to talk about is what ADL does in terms of influencing DoD policy and acquisition. And this document you see here is this DoD Instruction 1322.26. And if you're an xAPI product owner or an authoring tool owner, this should really excite you because, or at least once I explain it, because this instruction tells the DoD how to do distributed learning. And ADL, with input from the Department of Defense, controls this document. And right now in this document, it has both SCORM and xAPI as the 2 distributed learning standards that all content tools, authoring tools, and those that distribute those types of content, traditional distributed learning content, have to follow. And what we're seeing, though, I'll call it pressure, we're seeing increased pressure from organizations within DoD that are implementing xAPI to remove SCORM. Right now in the conversations I've had, it's probably about 50-50, where people that are implementing xAPI, some of them are telling me that, look, if you really want to get legs on this thing, you've got to you got to take SCORM out of the DoD, because right now everybody's going to use it until you can't. And we're not there yet, and in the end it's not my decision to make, but I think we're trending there. So I think that the time to be an xAPI product owner and developer is now. It's coming. And to kind of provide a little bit of a timeline to that, this is the xAPI modernization timeline. So when we start talking about the different areas in which ADL has been operating, and I don't expect you to read all this. You can look at it on the slide a little later. I'm going to talk through most of these in the coming slides. But what we see here are standardization of xAPI, the notion of introducing xAPI profiles and supporting technologies there, conformance testing, CMI 5, and all these areas are really set to improve both the DOD and government, but also improving industry and academia by providing these standards, prototypes, tools, and services so that the community can really grow as time goes on. And within this xAPI standardization effort, the slide here isn't as important. The slide here is really talking about the IEEE Standards Association process. What I want to talk to you about, though, is the different efforts that we're seeing in the IEEE to get xAPI standardized and the progress we've made to date. That end date that we're looking at for standardization is March 2020. So at that point, we're hopeful that xAPI can become an IEEE standard. And what that means is that IEEE supports it. It takes on kind of a new form in that there are different publications that can be written to it. We can have more guides written towards it, and really locking down a lot of the things that might still be gray. So the way that the progress that we made to date include what we call a should star report. So if you've ever read the spec, there's a bunch of shoulds in there that have a star after them. And what that basically means is that the authors and the working group decided that, well, this really should, the wording should be exact so that there's only one behavior, but right now it breaks too much to do that. And what we did in the xAPI standardization group is we found all those should stars, we talked about them, we figured out how they should go, and we created a report that outlined the different areas. And then what we did after that is we reached out to all the different learning record store providers that were listed in ADL LRS adopters. So anybody that basically self-asserted that they were that they followed xAPI, as well as anybody who passed the conformance test suite. We reached out to all of them and essentially created a survey and asked them questions about these different behaviors that would change. And there was an overwhelmingly positive response to this. Positive in both the number that participated, I think we had 25 different product owners participate, as well as their support of movement towards these the standard behavior to really get rid of some of this gray area. And this includes things like using universal time, coordinated time in all the timestamps, because they're just things that if you allow these different bad practices to propagate, it's going to make it hard on everybody. And UTC isn't necessarily a bad practice, but you can easily see where there might be issues if different people in different parts of the world are taking training and the LRS can't synchronize exactly what's happening. We're continuing to work to resolve different issues within the spec, and we're hopeful that we can get to something that is really 100% usable by everybody and that serves the community well. So I want to talk a little bit about CMI 5. Now I did say there's no xAPI 101 slides, but there might be a little bit of a CMI 5 101 necessary. So CMI 5 is an xAPI profile engineered for this particular use case, where we have essentially a learning management system that launches a particular piece of content or series of content and wants to take it. Now, the cool thing about this group that developed CMI 5 is that they started out on this path without having any sort of awareness of xAPI. These are the requirements that they had as a group, and this was originally going to be implemented as SOAP, if you're familiar with that type of technology. But what happened is the AICC and the ADL came together and said, hey, we're doing similar things, we have similar goals, let's align these two specs. And basically what CMI 5 then becomes is all these rules on top of xAPI. And as you can see, it provides some great benefits. So to really break down some of the things that it can do, they're right here. It's a great thing that CMI 5 exists, because we can get that LMS use case really knocked out and then providing that extra value of xAPI. Now, I mentioned xAPI profiles, and I'm not positive that people here might know what that is. So what an xAPI profile is, the best way to describe it are these two analogies that are both true at the same time. So first, an xAPI profile can be considered a blueprint in designing experience data. It contains the measurements you need, all the different parts, and how they're laid out really technically. But the second way of thinking about it is a do-it-yourself YouTube video, which really includes more guidance and best practices to solving a particular problem. So we have many different profiles, like a video profile in xAPI, which has both the descriptive part, here's how you would use this, here's how we expect you to deploy different statements in the session playing of a video. Here's how you do it when it pauses, here's what our expectations are when you hit play, here's our expectations for durations and things like that. But it also has the technical format to it. So in order to really instantiate xAPI in a community of practice, you need these profiles. Now, I've tried to explain that, and if you start to implement profiles, you're going to realize that you're going to need some help, because what we don't want to do is dump too much information on a particular anyone to have to understand too much to implement an xAPI profile. So what we have is a profile server, and I've tried to explain how important the profile server is to xAPI adoption, but this is the analogy I've come to like the most. So the profile server is really the Baymax to your Hero. Now, Hero has some great ideas, but Baymax is really his enabler. What the profile server can do is it can publish these profiles. It allows web services to tie in, and it can validate your xAPI data. So in other words, you don't have to show up with all the technical computational power. You can just have great ideas and then benefit from the existing ideas and infrastructure. And that's one of the current ADL projects that we've already funded with Making Better. And by September 2020, what we're going to have up is this software that can publish, serve, and validate xAPI profiles and data. So in being able to do this, we can really establish an online tool that in one-stop shop where people can understand the existing profiles, drag in the different pieces they need to create types of content, and if it doesn't exist, they can influence that marketplace and add to it in terms of expanding the corpus of available terminology that exists within xAPI. So I think this is just of unbelievable importance, and I'm so happy we funded it. Now, in DOD, one thing we're struggling with is, like I hinted at before, is making this switch of how do we get rid of SCORM but bring in xAPI. We have a lot invested in SCORM, and the way that it ends up actually getting done is through CMI 5. So this tricky balancing act, as you see Dr. Jones here trying to pull off, is going to be tricky, because SCORM it's not something that's bad. So in a way, SCORM is like classic Nintendo games like Tecmo Bowl or Dr. Mario. Now, those games are still great games. They're fun to play, but before I boot them up, I kind of have to blow on the cartridge and get them going. And similarly, we see these hurdles that just get harder and harder within DoD and existing infrastructure, and with new web and with current web best practices to implement. SCORM used to be run on IE, IE4, IE5. IE doesn't even exist anymore. Those are the types of things we're looking at, and as much as we would like to, the tech is still old, as fun as they may be. And then what if I want to expand my playbook beyond 8 plays, or solve more intricate puzzles, or even play with a friend online? Those games are still fun for what they did, and SCORM is still great for what it does, but if you want to get more, you have to get to xAPI, and the Department of Defense, like I said, is trying to make this switch, but it's hard, so hopefully that CMI 5 can enable that switch, because it does some things very well. It uses distributed content instead of package importing. It doesn't use pop-up windows, and it stores your typical event data in a standard way with xAPI, but it allows you to easily innovate into new data. So we're hopeful that that switch can happen. There's a couple different areas in which ADL is specifically helping DoD and the whole of government, and one of them is in this xAPI Adoption Working Group. And really what this group does is it consists of all members of all services, and what we've done is coordinate a lot of these previous efforts. We've updated that DOD document. We've essentially influenced the current funded efforts that I had described on the first few slides, and kicked off some accreditation efforts for this LRS. So when we talk about allowing tools to permeate into DoD easier, this group was paramount in having that happen. And another area we're trying to grow is this notion of a DoD profile. So another effort ADL has is this TLA Working Group. So if you've ever heard of the Total Learning Architecture, it's ADL's vision of a future learning ecosystem that brings together xAPI and a lot of other different concepts. This notion of the universal training record, the notion of competencies and credentials, artificial intelligence, machine learning. It's really this vision that all these things eventually can really lead to optimized, personalized learning. But we need to scale that back a little bit, because out of all those technologies, xAPI is really the only one that's mature. Sure, we see a lot of different systems implement competencies and credentials and learner profiles, but there's not a lot of collaboration among them yet. We're seeing a lot of collaborative efforts between the competency standards bodies, but there's still a long ways to go. But out of all those subgroups, there's various subgroups to do all these different things I've talked about, but the one I'm interested in, and the one I'm actually leading up, is this notion of creating a DoD-wide xAPI profile. So in my opinion, the DoD needs to combine the usage and specialization of a lot of selected profiles into a larger DoD profile, as well as defining its own use cases that really kind of creates a best of breed, so that when DoD starts rolling out these solutions, they can all follow the same profile. And ideally, what we do is we get that profile out to vendors who want to implement, such that if you create learning content or you create an authoring tool that can create content, that all it has to do is pull in this profile. So you guys don't really have to do any guesswork as far as what types of information to include for xAPI. Just want to give a little teaser for next week. So if you haven't heard of Dave yet, he's the new sheriff in town, and if you've got some data that needs wrangling, I'd recommend you come back next week and talk to Shelley and Jody, because I'm sure they're going to talk about him. And that's where I'll leave you guys for this week. So if there's any questions, I am happy to answer them. I guess I'll go to the...
Oh, Andy, we have questions.
All right.
So there'll be some questions coming in the chat. I've been fielding a few. I'll give a little bit of context before my first question. And one is that what a lot of people don't know, and you'll be able to probably tell a little bit better than I can, but the history of SCORM and now xAPI is really that the U.S. Defense Department needed a way to share content and software and vendors across the services to be cost effective and time effective, as well as to build a rich and interoperable marketplace of vendors to choose from, right? Rather than being pigeonholed into any one set that are expensive then to shift. And what ADL has created with SCORM and now xAPI, I think, is really very very unique among industries and has enabled us to flourish. So I appreciate that. I realize it wasn't just you, but there was you're a big part of that. In general, you're talking a lot, Andy, about how this will benefit the Department of Defense as far as profiles and shareability. Can you give toss out some examples of how this benefits industry? Most of the people in cohort and on this call today are not from software vendors, but they work for large organizations that train their employees to do stuff.
Right, and I think one of the biggest ways we've seen this impact is in how software providers impact industry and academia, because they have DoD as a customer. So what we see is that because we're able to create rigid standards, and because we have we as DoD are the largest company, if you will, in the United States in terms of having 2.4 million employees, we can throw our weight around and say, we're not going to play unless you produce, unless your authoring tool has these particular standards that it creates towards. And by doing that and throwing our weight around, we hopefully make better tools. The tool vendors usually should make better tools for you guys to use and really benefit from the fact that we were able to essentially coerce them into adopting standards. If there's really not that forcing function, unfortunately we don't see a lot of interest in commercial products adopting standards. So that's one area, one way that DoD implementing this can really benefit everyone.
Okay, that is like super helpful. So you kind of, we're all working in and wrestling with xAPI 1.3, and you dangled about an xAPI 2.0, and I can only imagine that might strike fear in people's hearts. Is there a big difference? Is there backward compatibility? How do I prepare for 2.0? Can you kind of give us a little bit of a hint, or should we wait until?
Sure. So, and that's part of the reason we had the survey out to the LRS community, is that we were concerned that they might see this as, wow, thanks for hurting us early adopters. We went ahead and adopted it's 103, just to be clear, but we went ahead and adopted 103, and now you're stabbing us in the back by making all these changes. No, it's really the only vendors that are going to be hurt by this are the ones that were doing things right on the fringe of incorrect. If you followed good best practices, if you follow the should recommendations that are in xAPI, you're going to be fine. The data is not changing. Almost all of these requirements are things that are put on the LRSs, and they recognized that and they accepted that. And like I said, they were overwhelmingly positive in these in the survey responses to this change. So I think they realized that if we do this right, then everybody wins. And the longer we leave any sort of gray area, the longer that there's going to be fragmentation, and there's going to be that one vendor who is doing things wrong and is still considered compliant, and then because they might be the loudest voice, they end up attracting too much attention, and then people start giving into, well, everyone else does it this way, but they're still compliant, so it's fine that they do it that way. We want to just eliminate that off the bat and really gravitate toward these best practices. So I would say the UTC is the biggest one. So because in xAPI you do use your own timestamps, the move to UTC is probably advised, but LRSs are going to be able to grab that too. So a good LRS is going to be able to take your xAPI data and essentially update it for you. We're not changing any of the areas that are considered immutable in xAPI statements. So if you're familiar with that concept, anything that you've put in your data is fine. The LRS will be allowed to reformat it in the particular ways that we've looked at changing. But no, there's nothing to worry about, especially if you're just developing xAPI content. I can't see any area you'd really have trouble. The only other issue I'd say with trouble would be you're more likely to get bit by the idea of personally identifiable information. So if you're not using a home page and a user ID that somewhat obscures who the person is, as GDPR from Europe slowly slinks its way over here, those things might end up biting you later. But I worry more about that in terms of future-proofing a solution.
Awesome. Well, so that's a collective sigh from 44 people signed into the cohort today, and anybody who watches the recording. And then just from way back at the beginning, actually Brian Duck has a question about planned revisions, upcoming changes to CMI 5 in 2020. Are we just driving to stability, or are we expecting a series of revisions ongoing?
So that's a really good question. I'm in that group, and I don't see there being any revisions. We've been tossing around different ideas for a long time, and I haven't seen any reason to suggest any aspect of CMI 5 changing. The real benefit of CMI 5 in its adoption of xAPI is it got to benefit from all those should stars. So when CMI 5 started and looked at the xAPI I think it was 1.01 at that time, there were already a lot of best practices where the CMI5 group said, well, that's a should, but we're going to make that a must. So in a way, a lot of ways, the CMI5 group is ahead of the game, and they don't have to worry as much about this backwards compatibility and anything that might arise from it because they're already doing it. There already is UTC as a requirement for CMI5. So that's why I don't see any future revisions needed, but you never know until it really becomes widespread adopted. But that's why I always tell people, if you're going to buy a tool, some sort of product tool, make sure that's CMI5 because then you're going to be in great shape. It's locked down. It's got all the different tracking that you need, plus some ways of launching and tracking content or launching content. Keeps track of registrations. It has all these best practices already implemented. It's more of a tangible target for an authoring tool or LRF, and even LRF, I would argue, in that means they know what they really know what they're doing if they implement CMI5, as opposed to with xAPI, they might know what they're doing, but you can't be sure until you test it out, unless it's a learning record store. A learning record store already has the conformance test suite. That should give you interoperable behavior, but in terms of, let's say, an LRS authoring tool, right now, and I remember, Megan, there was a group that did this, I don't know if it was last year or 2 years ago, time flies, but they evaluated the state of all xAPI producing authoring tools, and they found it was a mixed bag. We're still seeing that.
Actually, some of those that project team are on the call today. So yeah, so there's lots of good stuff. So quickly, one last question for you, Andy. When do you anticipate for the work around PII to be available or shared? Sandra wants to know. She creates training in the healthcare sector, so that's really, really important.
So we already have some research that's available. If you want to, let's see, I'm trying to think of the best way to get access to it. Probably just reach out to me. If anybody wants access to the current state of that, where we are now, so we have a 4-pronged project on privacy that's already gone through, and those 4 prongs are essentially user-tailored privacy, privacy by design, privacy within the TLA, and then the most important prong is still going on and will wrap up in December, which is most important for us is how does privacy work with DOD policies and existing laws. And that might be closer to what you're looking for, because if you're in healthcare, you probably have to follow a lot of the same laws DOD does. It might not be a one-to-one match, but that research is going to come out in December. And what this follow-on effort is going to do is take it to the next level and then start instantiating software that can actually keep track of privacy-based decisions and performance, as well as, of course, integrate with anything else that comes out until that time, because it's a rapidly moving area.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Andy. I feel like an insider now. We're going to transition right back to the PowerPoint and give some more context about where we are within Cohort, and then we'll head into team updates using GitHub. So right now we're in week 9. So at this point, which you could still be iterating and still trying things out, testing, figuring things out, but you should also be applying things, thinking about your next steps and preparing for demos. In the next few weeks, we'll be starting demos on this call. So as I transition the screen over to our updates, I want to prepare Team Agent, if you're on the call, to give your update. You are up first. If anyone on the call from Team Agent, Tracy or anyone is prepared to give an update, go ahead. Aaron has given access on your mic. All right. Is anyone from Team Alexa on the call? Helena, did you want to give your update? Or Brian? this week, Team Alexa has divided the interactions and set up in voice flow, no problem, Helena, and added the API block. They're going to move on to QA the interactions and test the API block. I know that Team Atlassian Confluence is on hold, so we're going to go into Team Beginners. Is anyone from Team Beginners on the call? Trisha or anyone from the team able to give their update? Oh, Holly, no problem, Holly, I'll give the update. So they started developing a RISE course and help them kind of think through the process, and we'll be able to help other beginners. Again, needing technical coaching, make sure you're using the Slack channel. You can absolutely ask any questions that you might have in the Slack channel, and there are lots of folks that can offer feedback. If you have specific things that you're looking for, you can at me, and I can see, or Megan, and we can see how we might be able to help align or connect you to someone. Awesome. Thanks, Brian, for helping that team out. Team Captivate JS Library. Is anyone on the call to give that update? Brian, Floyd?
Yep. Good
Awesome.
afternoon. I'm here. Happy Halloween, everybody. So I feel like we're in the dog days of the cohort, and what I mean by that is not a whole lot new happening, just a lot of a lot of loose ends that we're tying up and things that we're doing. Pretty exciting. There are a good handful of folks now that have applied the wrapper to their own Captivate projects and are having success with that, hosting it even from LMSs and things like that. So that's pretty exciting to see it work in places other than the test environment. I think the biggest barrier to entry right now is the manual process of installing it. You have to be a little bit literate with code and navigate around a little bit and be comfortable with that, which I know a lot of folks are not. So one of the things we're really working on is creating a desktop application where you can just drag and drop the publish folder, and it will parse the file and put in all the necessary stuff so that the wrapper will work. The one ask I have is if there's anyone anywhere in the cohort, whether you're part of our cohort or not, if you use Captivate for quizzing a lot, and you've got some kind of best practices that you use or some examples. We really don't at work, so I don't have a whole lot of examples to go off of other than what my brain can come up with, which isn't a whole lot when it comes to Captivate quizzing. So if you use it a lot and you wouldn't mind sharing some of that, please reach out to me because that is the one piece of the wrapper left that still needs some considerable work. Also in the update on which thing, GitHub, thank you. On GitHub, I put in a bunch of pictures of the desktop wrapper, give you some ideas of how customizable this wrapper will be for setting your own verbs, choosing which verbs you want to use, all of that kind of stuff. So plugging along great.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. And if you have experience with Captivate quizzing, please let Team Captivate JS Library know. Team Checking McChecklist. I think I saw Chris on the call. Did you have any updates, Chris? No? Okay. We'll go on to Team DragonStat. J-Rock, are you on the call to give the update for Team DragonStat?
I am indeed. So our team has, oh you can? Can or can't?
We can.
Okay, sorry, I struggled with that last time, so a little sensitive. Hopefully it works. We're in the building stage. Irina has done a mind map for us for the intervention that we're going to be putting together, which is going to be a storyline how-to, and then I have been actually building the adventure that they're going to play that we're going to use to test performance. So that will give us the ability to test how they're doing when they play the game, and then we can do A/B testing where we say, okay, take Irina's storyline and then compare the performance of the players that have been through the intervention to ones that maybe haven't, or maybe we do one adventure, then do the intervention, and then have them do another one and see, how the performance changes from that. David has been, we're talking about the CMI 5 thing today is good. David's been looking for profiles, been looking for the right verbs to use, and that kind of thing. So how you guys can help out with us I've got the adventure put together. I need to tweak it to make sure it is a good proving ground for the kind of skills that we needed to teach to and test for Arena's part. So I am going to be trying to host a game on Saturday. If you guys go over to the xAPI Dragon Stats Slack channel, you'll see a sign-up sheet if you'd be interested in either taking part in the game or just observing or whatever. We're going to do a Zoom room. And it may not be like a smooth, fast game like you're used to seeing maybe if you watch Critical Role or anything. It's going to be us playing through the mission and saying what needs to change, what needs to be better to get an accurate reading on the skill level of the players going. So if everybody's excited for that, or if anybody is, come nerd out with us on Team xAPI Dragon Stats and help us make this good.
Awesome. Thank you, J-Rock. So if anybody wants to play the game Saturday, go check out their Slack channel. Team ECE, I know Joanne is in a place where she's not able to give her update and ask that I share. So some accomplishments for the week is they've uploaded files to GitHub. They've sent successful statements for changing diapers, peeing, pooping, meal times, and nap times, and even included what they see in SCORM Cloud. So that's really exciting to see all these statements and data set. They're needing help with timestamps and need more support on JavaScript. So if anybody can offer feedback or support on those timestamps, please venture over to the Team ECE Slack channel and help them out. Team HTML5 tracking, is anyone available to give that update? Julie or anyone else? All right. Team interactive video. I think I saw Adrian on the call. Are you available to give the update? All right. I'm going to go on to Team LlamaSoft. Is anyone from Team LlamaSoft available to give the update? Andrew or anyone?
They're still recovering from DevLearn and winning DemoFest with their xAPI project.
Awesome.
Sorry, I was very excited about that.
Oh, Adrian is on the call to give the update for Team Interactive Video, but her mic isn't working. All right. Team Microsoft Teams. Is anyone on the call to give the update? Leah? Team Online Lab. Is anyone on the call to give that update?
Yes, this is
Luis?
Can you hear me?
Need you to be a little bit louder.
All right. Let me see. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So during the last 2 weeks, we have been, we completed some readings about the profiling on xAPI. By the way, those last 3 presentations have been very related with our topic. So we are very glad to hear those presentations. And today's Andy's presentation was very, very important for us. We started implementing some LRS on SCORM Cloud, test some statements, and we are defining right now a set of verbs, actors, and objects that will be defined for our profile. So that's our current state in the progress for our project.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Luis. Team Pebble. Is anyone on the call, Kristen, or anyone on the call to give your update?
For Judy? For Judy. All right, they've made some progress this week. They've created a storyboard and assigned out the different sections, and they're going to begin some individual work on the storyboard using sample code this next week. Team Query LRS, is anyone on the call to give an update there? Austin? Or anyone? All right, Team Scavenger Hunt, Tracy, I think I saw you on the call today. Are you available to give your update? Awesome.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So after it's been installed a couple weeks, I actually connected with Brady, and we're actually talking right now too. I got the WordPress plugin to import into WordPress. So I was able to make the connection between WordPress and SCORM Cloud, and he's helping me through some of the challenges I was having with testing, sending some xAPI statements from there. So coming up in the next couple weeks, I'll probably be seeking out some help to test, just looking around my website and filling out a couple items on a form so that I can go in and pull the data afterwards within SCORM Cloud.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy.
Yep.
Team Storyline LMS. I believe we're on a pause with that team right now. So Team Unity 3D Sandbox, is anyone on the call to give that update? Eric, I think you should be on the call. Okay. Team Vimeo and xAPI. Carolyn, are you on the call, or anyone from that team able to give an update? All right, Team WordPress and Learn and Dash. Is anyone on the call to give that update? James or anyone? But, well, they have an update. They've installed Learning Dash and Grassblade xAPI connector to WordPress. They're saying it doesn't look like much work was done, but it took a lot to configure the system, upload a RISE source, amend the index, and test the data to Veracity. So they're continuing to send out statements and experiment. So I think that that's all the updates for this week. What I'll do is shift over to our presentation. And we're going to wrap it up this week with a few notes with things that are coming up. So some good stuff to know is we're meeting at the same Adobe Connect every week at 2 o'clock p.m. Don't fret if you have to miss a week. We're uploading video recordings to our YouTube channel. Next week we have the State of the Specification with Shelly Blake Clock and Jody Liz. Again, share with your colleagues that it's never too late for Cohort, and they can sign up at xapicohort.com. There is also the Spring 2020 Cohort sign-up is on that website as well. Our party is coming up in Michigan and online December 13th, and you can sign up for the party. Within this email newsletter that goes out tomorrow with the links that everybody will be receiving, there's also a midpoint reflection. We're asking that everyone who's interested, please complete the reflection. It's going to give us into some insight into your learning thus far and can help us think through future cohorts. So please, please, please fill out that reflection. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. With that, I'm going to transition over to Megan, who's going to share some info about demos in the party.
Awesome. So we start demos in 2 weeks, which means now is the time that Jessica's going to reach out to project teams and ask them to sign up for a time slot either on week 11 or week 12 to demo. So be thinking about whether or not your team will be ready to go on then. On 11th or 12th, we have no guest speakers because the project teams are the guest speakers those weeks. It'll mean every team has about 10 minutes or so, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, depending on how many people sign up for a particular time. So that's a demo here. The nice thing, of course, we record it, so then you have it out to share with your friends and family. Tell your parents to get a bigger refrigerator for all the exciting, cool things they're going to put out. They'll need a smart fridge to play the video. But then the xAPI party is a conference during which we have the opportunity for much longer extended demos of cohort projects. So people are super, super interested in what happens here in cohort, even the people who aren't doing projects. So during party, and that's a few weeks after the cohort ends, so you have a few extra weeks. Most teams find a last burst of energy to put some finishing bells and whistles. So they're very quick demo during cohort, then has a little bit more polish for a longer and larger demo during the xAPI party. xAPI party gets a viewership online, so we run it online. It looks kind of like this. We probably, Aaron, get, what, 100 and 150 people to sign up for the online version. So they come in and they get demos. If you are able to come face-to-face here in Michigan, I know several people on this list are, then you can pop in, you can see the demos, or there are other sessions going on. So we'll have some data analytics, some learning ecosystems, some what is xAPI, some other projects and samples and things like that to get in on. Everything is free. So spread the word. If you've got somebody at work who's like, well, I don't really have time for cohort, but they want to come to the party, that's a great day to get 1 day's worth of xAPI fun. So our ask is, please, project teams, have something to demo in weeks 11 and 12, and then please, project teams, feel very, very extra special invited to party to present your projects, because that's a really nice opportunity to get the word out. We do have lots of fun at party, and we have commissioned a cocktail for xAPI. It is called the Statement, and we do serve the Statement at the xAPI party. So keep in mind that demos, right, we don't need you to come to the party, even though we love that Judy and Kristen are. We don't need you to come to the party to demo, because you can demo right through xAPI or through the Adobe Connect here. So that is, totally, basically this channel is open all day long for demos. Holly, what an excellent idea to share the recipe. So we should totally do that. We should have a global virtual drink along. Do it.
Sounds like fun.
So.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. So again, project teams, be thinking about whether or not you'll be prepared to present on the 14th or 21st, because I'll be doing some outreach to get sign up. And then if you want to sign up for the party, whether online or in person, it's right in the handy link tab right below on the right
the LRS endpoint
corner.
Period.
Alrighty, and I think that those are all of our updates and information for today. Continue to go out there and make things and try things, and let us know if you have any questions or need some support. Have a great Thursday.